Well, one of the highlights of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Silicon Valley this weekend will be a visit to the Google campus here in Mountain View, California. I'm joined here on the program today by Amit Singhal, the Senior Vice President of Software and Engineering here at Google. Also Aparna Chennapragada, the head of Google Now, which in itself is another story we must talk about in detail. Thank you very much to all of you, for both of you, for joining us. Mr. Singhal, Sundar Pichai put out a video message for Prime Minister Modi where he talked about a revolution taking place in India. He talked about digital India. Firstly, in terms of what Google expects from this visit, what do you think the message will be to India and to the Prime Minister?
So we are really excited about Digital India. Google has been in the business of bringing information to everyone on this earth. And one of the challenges of doing that is everyone in India or everyone in the world should be connected to the internet. And Prime Minister Modi is working on connecting every Indian citizen to the internet that would allow everyone to find the information that they need. Everyone in India would have access to the same information that the Queen of England has or anyone else privileged in the West has. And that would allow them to live a far better life, improve their lives, their families' life, their communities' life. We're really excited about this visit because Prime Minister Modi has put this vision of Digital India, and I believe that's the right vision. And working with enterprises like Google and other companies, we can bring to every citizen in India a far better quality of life through digitization.
So, Aparna, one of the interesting things that Sundar said was that he thinks that in the next few years, 20 million small businesses, 50 million Indian women would get online for the first time. That's a pretty staggering statistic, and that's quite amazing. Do you think that that would realistically be possible in just a few years?
No, it's actually already happening, right? So the reason I get pretty excited whenever I hear this, and in fact my colleagues joke saying I should carry this as a billboard, which is mobile changes everything. And when you hear that phrase, you say, well, of course it changes things in Silicon Valley, but the biggest change that's happening right in front of our eyes is actually how this phone has become a secret weapon for folks, and has given access to information that they've never had, like Amit was saying, right? So to give you an example, my mom, who's in India, and she found out before we did about an earthquake in Silicon Valley, near Silicon Valley in Napa, because she had the phone. She had an Android phone with her. She used Google, and she found out that information much earlier. And so to me, I think getting both businesses coming online and underprivileged and like people with previously no access to information coming online is the biggest change that's happening right in front of our eyes. And one thing I would add there is that unlike the first revolution with the World Wide Web, which I was part of, and I worked in one of the startups that made the first internet faster, what I see as a bigger change here, which is the reason the Digital India vision is exciting, is that it's an order of magnitude more people, right? Somewhere next year, the 20th billionth phone will be sold in the world. So we're talking about more than 3.5 billion people with phones, doing things that they never did before, right? So my mother orders a cab through Ola Cab. She buys books. She talks to the sabji wali. So it's completely different from what we've seen in the past.
And I think you nailed it when you said it's really about the mobile. And interestingly, we're sitting here in the cafeteria, which is why you hear, I think, coffee being made and dishes being thrown around a little bit, but you have a nice pool table and people playing table tennis as well. But coming back to what we were talking about, what are the difficulties though? I mean, Digital India is a big idea. It's a great idea. Sundar talking about these targets is a great idea, but there are huge infrastructural difficulties that India faces with regard to digital connectivity. So what do you think are the big bottlenecks right now that we need to work on?
So the good thing that I'm seeing out there with respect to bottlenecks to access, fundamentally access is a big bottleneck. How do you get internet in the hands of these billion people on low-cost devices? These are people who cannot afford a lakh rupee phone, okay, or a 60,000 rupees phone. These are people who need low-cost access to computing and low-cost access to network. With Android, what we are seeing is that the device prices are coming down and you're getting great devices for $100, 6,000 rupees or 7,000 rupees. And with those devices in people's hands and all the work that we are seeing that the government is doing in the access sector, various telcos are doing in the access sector, and we are also doing in the access sector. I have no doubt that we would realize this vision of having 1 billion people in India come online in the near future. By some projection, the world will have 5 billion people connected by 2020. And I have no doubt that a large number of those 5 billion, almost 1 billion, will come from India.
Aparna, what do you see though as the challenges then in India? Like where do you see the problem areas that need to be worked on?
Look, there are 3 levels, right? So first is exactly like Amit said, it's the access. It's the almost like the table stakes, right? If you don't have an access to a affordable computing device, you have nothing to go. And then once you have access, what we've observed anecdotally and through our user studies and just observing how people use phones and services is the second is a set of products and services that help them in their daily life, right? It's not useful if you have an access to a phone, but it somehow does things that don't relate to you in a daily life. Let me give you an example, right? So when we did this user study, one of the things we realized is with a product like Google Now or Google Search, people didn't know the treasure trove of information that exists out there. So the moment when I actually explained to this user saying, hey, you can actually get a PNR status, the train schedule status, through Google, his eyes lit up. He's like, I didn't know that, right? So the second, beyond access, is how do you build this layer of products and services that give you information? Right? Then after that, the third layer I think about is how do you actually enable, an ecosystem of services, right? This is where there's a very rich startup scene in India, and I think it's great for Google, great for the ecosystem as such. But how do you foster that level of innovation where new products and services get built and get used by people?
And so where does the government come in? What do you need the government to do in order to enable this to happen?
I think it's both public sector and private sector. One of the things, and in a way, US is a good example where there's obviously like a lot of support from the public sector in terms of fostering entrepreneurship and innovation, and the Valley is a great example of that, right? Where much of the research that it's a foundational work for the internet actually was funded by the government. But then the other part that's as important, and you see, at least personally, I start to see signs of it. I mentor a few startups in India where you start to see the private sector and a bunch of folks kind of taking that entrepreneurial leap and saying, how can we build services and products that actually solve real user problems, right? That's as important in my opinion.
All right. One of the big issues when it comes to the internet, of course, is user privacy. There was a report that I think Google itself had taken out last year where it said that after the United States, the Indian government had the maximum number of requests when it came to data on users. Now, is that a concern that Google continues to have with regard to not just India, but the United States as well? Is India still very high up in this kind of a request?
So we believe that our users should have free access to information, because free access to all information is the foundation of a well-informed, educated society. Now, various governments have various reasons to request information from us, and we have to abide by the law in every country that we are in, and that's what we do. But we fundamentally believe that governments would have a far better society if they keep the information and access to information open, because putting those barriers may prevent the next Google from happening in that country, or the next better company being built in that country. So in general, it's in everyone's benefit, the governments, the citizens, and the companies involved, to have free, open information available to everyone.
But do you continue to get a lot of requests from the Indian government to remove content or ask for user data? Do you have any statistics on that? I don't know.
So all the requests that we get from various governments, we publish in the transparency report that you can find out there. We make it open and transparent. This is what we are getting from the governments and other entities.
Yeah, I mean, I have last year's statistics, which said some 2,794 requests by the Indian government from January to June of 2014. So that would be, that's a fairly high number, and the United States actually leads. That's what people don't know, that the US leads in terms of these kind of requests. So, how do you see that? I mean, are these all security related? Are they all related to security or what?
Look, clearly, I can't comment on each and every one of these, but fundamentally, our first reaction when we get such a request is to make sure it's indeed valid, and there's a valid concern from the government behind a request like this. And our teams look at it We want to ensure that these are valid requests. We get the requests, we only abide by the ones that we feel are valid and the governments are in their rights to do that. Many a times we would go challenge governments for such requests. In the US, we were the only company that did not turn over data in a blanket form to the government. Various other search engines did, whereas we took even our government to the court because we believe in an individual's right to seek information.
So do you often reject the Indian government's requests as well?
I don't have the statistics on the top of my head, but fundamentally, we would challenge requests if we feel that they are overreaching.
The other big debate in India right now also is on net neutrality. And, Google has issued a statement in support of net neutrality here in the United States. However, there's been some controversy back home in India because there was a report, I believe, in August, where Google was apparently trying to prevent the Internet and Mobile Association of India from taking an anti-zero rating stand in its submission to the Department of Telecom's report on net neutrality. Now, what Google was then being accused of was taking different positions, saying one thing, here in California, but saying something else in India.
So we believe in an open internet. We built Android so that any OEM can go build an Android phone and sell it to any citizen in India or anywhere in the world. They don't even have to have Google in an Android. In China, you can buy an Android phone which has no traces of Google. So we believe in an open ecosystem and partnering with people to bring open ecosystems to our users. When it comes to net neutrality, as you saw in the US, we are heavy proponents of net neutrality. At the same time, we have to take a per country view of how we can bring, not just us, everyone can bring open platforms to the user. And that's why we are looking at India, where data costs are high and so on and so forth, so as to how we can build an ecosystem where every player in the ecosystem can bring their services at a cheap rate to the users. It's not just about Google, it's about the entire ecosystem.
So is it a different rule for India, different from your stand that you take here?
We have to look at all the countries. We haven't really made any rule or any such thing for India, but we have to understand the local market and the local economy and the local ecosystem. But we fundamentally believe that everyone, every publisher, every content creator, every service, every app developer should have the same access to the user that anyone else.
So you don't agree with a platform then like internet.org?
Well, internet.org is Facebook's platform, and they're doing what they believe is right, but we fundamentally believe in having everyone, every publisher, reach the user in the same way.
But let me ask you one more tricky question. You also are facing an investigation by India's Competition Commission, which has actually accused Google of rigging search results for the benefit of its own brands and those of sponsoring businesses, and that's an ongoing probe that is underway. How do you respond, to this probe?
Look, we are evaluating the CCI report, and we are working with the CCI. I can say this at a personal level. I have worked in the field of search for 25 years, 15 at Google. I have devoted my life to bringing every user the right answer when they ask for it. And that's exactly what we have done for everyone around the world. And we continue to do that, and we will keep continuing that. When you look at search, our job is to give users the best answers. When it comes to Google, there's a clear separation between content for like advertising, for which we have taken money from someone, and the organic search results. Every time we take money from someone to put something on the page, those are our ads, we clearly mark them in a user visible way, saying this is advertising and that is not advertising. Now, no matter what anyone does, they cannot pay Google any amount to influence the non-advertising part of search result page. This entire search team has devoted their lives to that mission, and we continue to do that, and I have no doubt that we have done right by the user for the last 15 years that I've been here and responsible. and we have abided by every law when it comes to running it. We run it with utmost integrity and passion.
Well, that the Competition Commission of India continues to hear that case. Let me though ask you, Aparna, also on the rise of Indians in big companies like Google, and that's something that's really interested people back home, especially after Sundar Pichai took over. You have Satya Nadella before. What is it about Indians like yourself who end up really succeeding in these big giant tech companies?
I think your name has to start with the letter S, though. I'm kidding. Sundar, Satya. But I think, I can't speak for everybody, but personally, I think of like 3 big factors that I see as influential in terms of whatever way I can contribute. One is my unabashed pride in having gone to IIT Madras. I think that's one of the key factors I attribute to, and not just because of course, like the theoretical computer science that I learned there, but actually in terms of like thinking about problem solving and having this framework for problem solving that I can throw at, of course, solving the technical problems, but also, solving team problems, market problems. So that's one factor I see, just the foundation of Indian education system, and I don't mean just IIT, but like as such the Indian education system, right? I think it's underreported, underemphasized. It's a really big factor for many of us here. The second factor I think of as, it's not again specific to Indians, but I think this notion of really focusing on results, and that's something at the risk of again like sounding too highfalutin, like right down to the Gita, right? They're talking about just like focusing on making sure that you have the right effort and like the results will take care of us itself. I think that is one of the other factors that you see common, and again not specific to Indians, but you see that in a lot of Indians. And then the third factor I think about is the Valley's sensibility. And I don't mean it's just the physical zip code of the Silicon Valley, but certainly that's it's embodied here.
Of innovation, encouraging excellence.
Exactly, of kind of taking these risks, of a little bit of the jugaad, right? And then saying, okay, let's actually try something. It may completely fail, but guess what? In the process, you've learned a lot that you can then apply to the next problem you're solving. And I joined a startup, dropped out of a PhD program, joined a startup, went through the roller coaster.
Were your parents horrified?
Yes. So I grew up in a family of doctors. So when I went, my mom was disappointed. I did, first of all, math and computer science. And she said, write it off. But then when I joined the PhD program, she's like, oh, at least she'll be a fake doctor. And then I dropped out and went to this startup, and she's like, I'm writing this off.
No, what's also interesting though is that you hear stories of now a lot of Indians going back home and getting into the startup business, and especially in Bangalore, and so they are looking at opportunities back in India as well. Do you think that more and more Indian techies do see India as a favorable destination, that there's an advantage to going back home, and that maybe that an environment is being created there as well?
Indeed, that's true. Look, the world is much smaller than what it was when I left India in 1990. Today, I go to India multiple times a year. It's just so easy. And at the same time, India is booming. You go to India, it's a vibrant country. It's full of energy. My nieces and nephews, they live in an India that I wouldn't recognize if I had gone 20 years later. Fortunately, I went every year. It's a vibrant place, so techies and all entrepreneurs alike, rightly so, are saying, hey, there's so much opportunity, there's so much to be done in India, maybe I should. And that's a great thought. So what I love about this modern, small, shrunken world is that the Valley and India are getting closer and closer. I go to Bangalore multiple times a year, I have family there, and I see that the difference that there was between the Valley and India 25 years back is far small and evaporating by the day. And that makes me really proud and joyous.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure to talk to both of you on everything from Google to Silicon Valley and to your mother's. I'm sure now she's very proud. Is she proud today?
Yes, she better be.
All right. Thank you very much, Aparna and Amit Singhal. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.